Ramadan, inshallah. So we'll keep the circle general, inshallah. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Are we ready? Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Inna alhamdulillah, nahmaduhu wa nasta'inuhu wa nastaghfiruh. ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أما بعد السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. So we praise and we thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for bringing us into this extremely blessed month of Ramadan, the best month throughout the entire year. The month in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's mercy, kindness, blessings, barakah, grace, tawfiq floods down upon us even more than it does throughout the other months. A month in which the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, إِذَا جَاءَ رَمَضَانَ فُتِحَتْ أَبْوَابُ الْجَنَّةِ وَغُلِّقَتْ أَبْوَابُ النَّارِ وَصُفِدَتِ الشَّيَاطِينِ. That when the month of Ramadan comes, the gates of paradise are flung wide open, the gates of hellfire are closed tight, and the devils are chained. It's a time in which the gates of paradise are flung wide open, and one of the explanations by one of the great Shafi'i scholars of the 6th Islamic century, Al-Izz ibn Abdus Salam. In fact, this scholar, Al-Izz ibn Abdus Salam, is called Sultan al-Ulama. Sultan al-Ulama, the crown, the prince of the scholars. He was a great scholar of the 6th Islamic century. He explains that Futihat Abwab al-Jannah, that the doors of paradise are open, in that Allah's mercy, Allah's forgiveness, Allah's tawfiq, grace, comes flooding down. And not only that, doing deeds to draw close to Allah and His forgiveness, doing deeds of Jannah become that much more easier. غُلِّقَتْ أَبْوَابُ النَّارِ, and the doors of hellfire are closed tight, is similar but the opposite. That it's harder to disobey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in this month. One of the reasons is that Allah's rahmah, mercy, and Allah's tawfiq, grace, comes down in this month, which makes it easier, even for lazy hearts, to do more good things. And secondly, when a large section of people are moving in one direction, it's very difficult to move in the opposite direction, to swim against the tide. The example that I quite often give, and it's a really nice pictorial example, is that if any of you have seen in one of those nature programs a shoal of fish, hundreds, maybe thousands of fish, all swimming one way. It's almost impossible to find a single fish swimming against the tide. It's just not going to happen. If the individual fish starts like that, just by the sheer force of the movement, it will turn the fish around such that you get pulled in the same direction. That's a good metaphor, that's a good example, method for living in Muslim communities. With all the difficulties and trials and tribulations of living amongst fellow Muslims that there can be and often is, one of the things is that we get pulled in good directions, providing the community as a whole is going in a good direction. But it works the other way around. Once a nasty virus begins to circulate amongst the Muslim community, let's do this DHS swindle, let's do this insurance fraud, let's do this, and it begins, or dunya begins to set into us, and we start infecting other people with our ideas, and then other people start infecting others, until that same community can be doing bad things, and then you get caught up, if we're not careful, in the bad things as well. So that's kind of important to realize. But the idea is غُلِّقَتْ أَبْوَابُ النَّارِ, that the doors of hellfire are closed, in that this is the month in which doing good deeds becomes that much more easy. And we witness this in our lives and in the lives of the Muslim communities in general. How many are people who we will never see in the mosque outside of Ramadan, and they'll be in the masjid even for night prayers in the month of Ramadan. In fact, over the Ummah's history, we've coined a name for those people who become practicing in Ramadan. We call them, anybody? Anyone heard the phrase Ramadanis? Okay, Ramadanis. Okay. And we kind of might scoff at it, oh, Ramadan, Muslim, Ramadani. But actually, doing something for Allah is better than doing nothing for Allah. So rather than scoff at them, now that they have come in for only Ramadan, let's try to connect with them such that it's not only for Ramadan. By the end of Ramadan, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has flooded their heart with desiring closeness to Him and obedience to Him, and that they begin to transform their lives. In fact, many people do. Ramadan is one of those two defining moments in a life of a believer. The first defining moment has to be Hajj, the pilgrimage. This is that act, and this is that occasion in which millions and millions and millions of people, Muslims, throughout history, even today, begin to change their lives with that single act of Hajj or pilgrimage. Ramadan, that's normally a once in a lifetime thing. The one that is more annual, comes around yearly, is Ramadan. Ramadan is a time in which people can actually, it becomes a springboard for people to become obedient to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and start establishing their prayer and their other acts of obedience, whereas before this they were away from Allah and the path of Allah. For those already practicing, Ramadan becomes that energizer, that month of reinvigorating ourselves, an Iman booster, a booster of Iman to kind of help us along in the other 11 months. Because the nature of Ramadan is that it's about centering ourselves and understanding what our life should revolve around. And then the hadith that I mentioned, the authentic hadith, were the gates of hellfire are closed, وَصُفِدَتِ الشَّيَاطِينَ, and the devils are chained. The shayateen, the shaitans are chained. If the devils are chained, why do some Muslims still do wrong? Because according to one of the explanations, even if the devils are all chained, the big ones and the small ones, and there's a difference of opinion, are they all chained or is it the big ones only? But let's say they're all chained. But since we've allowed them to whisper into our ears and our hearts for 11 months of the year, some residue will be left over. Some residue will be left over. A person who stops smoking, okay, it may take months or longer for the nicotine to drain, the poison, to begin to drain out of his blood system, and that's not to guarantee that it's not already affected the kidneys and the liver. Meaning, the after effects, the residue of poison can remain in the bloodstream long after one stops taking the actual poison or harm. The same thing with shaitan and his whisperings. And then there is always the nafs, the ego. Inna nafsa la'ammaratin bisu', the Quran says. Indeed, the soul, the ego, the nafs, it constantly incites towards evil. And then there is hawa, whims and desires. So that's still there. And then dunya itself, she is always there to tempt us. So even though the shaitans are chained up, there can still be bad because of these other factors. But the fact that the devils are chained up, it makes doing good deeds that much more easy. That much easier. And what is the goal of Ramadan? Well, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم يا أيها الذين آمنوا كتب عليكم الصيام كما كتب على الذين من قبلكم لعلكم تتقون. O you who believe, fasting, this siyam or sawm, which means to abstain, to refrain. Inni nadartu lirrahmani sawman. Maryam alayhi salam in the Quran. Inni nadartu lirrahman sawman. Indeed, I vow to Allah, Ar-Rahman, the Merciful, to sawm, to fast, to abstain. But here, the beginning of the verse Allah tells Maryam alayhi salam, eat and drink. Eat and drink. And with this eating and drinking, she says, I make a vow, a qasam to Allah to make sawm. The word sawm means to refrain, to keep away from something. It doesn't only mean to keep away from eating and drinking. In the case of Maryam alayhi salam, she was told, don't speak to the people. They will come to you and say, ask the question, Maryam alayhi salam, you're from a righteous family. You are a salihah, you are a righteous woman. And your family is righteous. And you're not married. And you have a child, Jesus, Isa alayhi salam. And they're going to make all sorts of accusations. They're going to demand answers. They're going to pressurize you. They're going to interrogate you. Don't speak to them. Inni nadartu lirrahmani sawma. I vowed not to do so. You told me not to do so, and I vow to you, I will not speak. Allah told her not to speak. She's making sawm from speaking. She's refraining from speaking. That's the word, what sawm means, to refrain. In the month of Ramadan, it means to refrain, keep away from eating and drinking, and relationships between husband and wife, as well as, of course, keeping away from sin. No good keeping away from eating and drinking, and I don't keep away from sin and disobedience. It defeats the point. And of course, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, just finishing that point off with Maryam alayhi salam, which was mentioned in Surah Maryam, and Surah Al-Imran before that, that Allah produces a miracle to defend her. Does anyone remember how one of the ways that Allah defends the reputation, the honor of Maryam alayhi salam, how does He do it? Absolutely. The Christ child alayhi salam spoke. Isa alayhi salam spoke whilst just a babe, just a newborn babe, speaks intelligently. Okay, now that's one of the ways. But subhanAllah, if we just cast our minds, what a tawakkul that righteous lady must have had. Sayyidah Maryam alayhi salam, just imagine, she knows that if I just explain a little bit, angel came, he promised me God, miracle, maybe they'll understand, because after all, they are Banu Israel. They know about miracles, they know about Jibreel, they know about these things. So maybe I told them, no, don't say that, just put your tawakkul upon me and I will do the rest. Because it's Allah saying, when I arrange your affairs, when I make tadbir of your affairs, it's better than you making tadbir, better than you trying to arrange your affairs. Allah, the Lord arranging our affairs, will always be better than us arranging our affairs. And that's a great reason why He has given us a nizam, a sharia, laws, not only laws in the legal sense, what happens if you steal, what happens if you, but also laws as in ethics. Don't steal, don't backbite, don't cheat, don't lie, be kind to parents. And spiritual laws as well. Don't have jealousy, don't show off, don't fall in love with this world, and forget the hereafter, hubbud dunya. Because us making up our own law and nidam is unlikely at all to be of great benefit. But when Allah makes it, He makes it with full knowledge, with full wisdom. And therefore the one who tries to run away from the Sharia teachings is the ghabi, is the idiot. Because he runs away from that which is best for him. And when he runs away to his urf and his aada, his customs, this is what me and my parents and me and my father, me and my forefathers, me have been doing for so long. And that thing is against the Sharia. Subhanallah. It shows the blindness of the heart. Not just the blindness of the eye, Because the eyes can be blind and the heart can still see. The blindness of the heart. Ramadan becomes that time to remind us. All of this, ye mere khandaan kya amal hai, and this is this, and this, throw that out the window. What khandaan? We're an ummah. Khandaan means like a family, an extended family, in the way of our fathers and forefathers. We are an ummah, following the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Is there anyone in your khandaan, our khandaan, better than the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam? More knowledgeable about Allah than the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam? More merciful, had more rahmah than the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam? More hikmah, more wisdom than the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam? More concern and care for other people? Show me one person in my khandaan, your khandaan, anybody's family and tribe and brotherly system that has, then we will consider following. But if you cannot, and we cannot, then subhanallah, وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَاكَ إِلَّا رَحْمَةً لِلْعَالَمِينَ. Allah says, we didn't send you except as a rahmah, except as a mercy to the world. Not just to the people, to the world. This is the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So centering ourselves in Ramadan, O you who believe, fasting is prescribed for you. As it was prescribed to those before you, then the goal is given, the maqsad is given. لَأَلَّكُمْ تَتَّقُونَ. To reach taqwa. And taqwa has many meanings. It can mean piety, it can mean obedience to Allah, it can mean fear of God. I'm just going to translate it today as being mindful of Allah. When we fear Allah, we're being mindful of Allah. When we obey Allah, we're being mindful of Allah. When we're remembering Allah, we're being mindful of Allah. So all of that is taqwa. So for the rest of this talk, I would like to hear from you all, given that the overall lesson to learn in Ramadan, the overall dars, lesson to learn in Ramadan, is the lesson of taqwa, being muttaqi, becoming mindful of Allah. What other lessons can we and do we learn throughout Ramadan? Especially those lessons that connect us directly to the taqwa of Allah. So let's mention some of the lessons that Ramadan, this beautiful shahr, this beautiful month, teaches us. Because Ramadan is a school in which we learn important things for this dunya and the akhirah, for this world and the hereafter. And as Muslims, as we're fasting, we need to remember those lessons, or consider those lessons. Keep those lessons in mind. So anybody want to start off with any one of the lessons that we learn when fasting? Anybody? I'm sure you know a few. Yeah, that's not a lesson, that's something we do. Abstaining from food and water, eating and drinking, is not a lesson, it's what we do. A lesson is something that you learn. Okay? In a lesson, if someone says, I've taught you a lesson, okay, it means that I've told you something or made you do something by which you've learned something valuable, hopefully valuable, important. So let me take, sorry, Afwan, yeah, Sheikh. Let me take the brother who's got his hands vigorously up there. Go on, one lesson.
Taking how you act in Ramadan.
Okay, be more specific. Be more specific. So, I want us to help to think and to answer. Not necessarily like for an exam, but just so that we can explain ourselves better. Okay, how we act, but that's very, very big, isn't it? It's a bit like, say, someone saying to you, oh, what's it mean to be a Muslim? Oh, it means to be good. Yeah, well, what does that mean, good? It means good. So give me a specific lesson.
In other 11 months, except Ramadan, you act different, but in the month of Ramadan, you're more conscious about it.
It's true, but that's going to the more mindful, more conscious, and you're absolutely right, young man. But I want to have specific lessons. Specific virtues, things that we learn.
Restraint away from all the things, like we are very attracted to the food, but we stay away from the food.
Okay,
yes.
So shall we call that self-control?
Self-control, yes.
Self-control. that even though food is normally halal, eating and drinking is normally halal. Okay? It's not like stealing and lying, which is haram in Ramadan and haram outside of Ramadan. Eating and drinking is normally allowed, halal, mubah. And yet, we've been, sorry, Uncle, and yet we've been told to stop during the daylight hours. So this teaches us self-control. This, Allah is telling us, learn the art of self-control. So that this self-control will benefit you throughout all the other months, not just in your religious life, but in your worldly life. I'll just give, just before Uncle say something. They did an experiment a couple of decades ago with young children. And the experiment was this. They got many young children, one by one, individually, and they said, look, you can either have these 10 sweets, these 3 sweets now, and they were sweets that all the kids liked, or if you wait 2 hours or 3 hours, you can have 7 sweets instead. And the idea was, they would get the children to choose, do they want them now, instant gratification, or can they wait for their pleasures, an element of self-control? And then they would follow these children for the next 10 years until they're 20, or until they're 18 to 20, to see how they do. So it was a social experiment over long periods of time, as normally these social experiments go. And they found that those kids who, because they all liked the sweets, and they were all really nice sweets, those kids who didn't gratify themselves instantly will get 3 sweets now and I can stuff them in my mouth and chomp them up. Or no, you know what, if I wait 2 hours, or maybe it was 5 hours, I can't remember, then I'll get 7 instead of 3. So it's worth the wait. Those children who exercised a degree of self-control and looked at the bigger picture on the longer term, what would benefit them on the long run, not on the short run, it was found that those same kids did far better in education, in life, in society, because they had the ability, bi'idhnillah, to regulate themselves, at least to some degree. Ramadan is teaching us that lesson from a young age, so that we don't become people who just live for instant gratification, which is really the society today. So self-control is one of the main things. Okay. Uncle?
I realize the difficulty of the needy people who haven't got enough.
Subhanallah. Realizing the plight, the difficulty of the needy people who haven't got enough. To have this sense of, an increased sense of rahmah, compassion for those without, and khidmah, what service, what can I do for those people? Okay, now I've thought that my stomach is, by 5 o'clock, my stomach is rumbling. Okay? And by 8 o'clock, feeling pretty hungry. Well before that, maybe feeling thirsty. There are people who suffer this thirst and this hunger every single day. And quite often, 800,000 people every day, mainly women and children, mostly women and children, don't even have an iftar. They don't even have a suhoor, in fact. They don't have a breakfast or a post-maghrib meal. Just, if they get something, they do. If they don't, which is why 30,000 people every day on this planet die of starvation or starvation-related illnesses. And yet, according to the United Nations World Health Organization, WHO, there is enough food to feed this planet 3 times over. But to our shame, we live in a world where food rots and people starve. So one of the great lessons of Ramadan is to feel the need that other people feel as a day-to-day thing, even more than a month. To feel that need. And what is related to that is, now that I feel the need, let me do something about it. But not just in Ramadan, where I'm going to give my zakat to one of those 8 categories of people, the faqir and the yatim and whomsoever. But what about the 11 months? Because they've still 800,000 people. They're not always the same people, because 30,000 of them die every day. They're on the... In our lives, what are we doing to help people? Not just Muslim people, which we should have, but people. But people. The other thing connected with what Uncle said, when I recognize the difficulty of fasting and going without, it increases me. So the first lesson, self-control. The second lesson, thinking about the poor and how to help them. It should be a serious concern. I just want to say one more thing about that. Whoever wishes to follow the Sunnah cannot claim they are following the Sunnah just by a beard on the chin, hat there, miswak there, some other things. Because more important than those Sunnahs, more important by 1,000 times, no, by 1,000,000 times, is the Sunnah of the Prophet and how he used to live with the poor, along with the poor. In fact, he actually lived like the poor. The first two, or living to help the poor, we are required to do. But living as the poor, we are not required to do. The Prophet, he consciously, purposely lived like the poor. Umar radiallahu anhu came in one day and he finds the Prophet sleeping on a reed mat, hard reed mat on the floor. So when the Prophet gets up, his bare back is showing all the marks. And Umar radiallahu anhu is weeping. He said, but the great kings of Persia and of Byzantine and whatsoever, they are sleeping on luxurious beds and mattresses. And you are Rasulullah, you are Allah's Messenger, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. And we have the money here. Why can't you just sleep on just something more comfortable? He said, oh Umar, oh Ibn al-Khattab, this is for them in this world and this is for us in the Akhirah. And this is not my way to live like this. SubhanAllah. The Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam in the Mi'raj, Hadith authentic, Jibreel alayhi salam gave him a choice, milk or wine. And he also chose the milk. And Jibreel alayhi salam said, Alhamdulillah that you chose the milk, because this shows a good sign about you and about your ummah. And then he was asked, the Prophet ﷺ, Allah has given you another choice. Do you want to be a messenger king? Malik Rasul Malik, like Sulaiman alayhi salam, Dawood alayhi salam. They were kings and they were Rasuls, okay? Or do you want to be a slave prophet, an Abdul Nabi? Both choices are good. He said, I would rather be Abdul Nabi, slave prophet. But all I ask from Allah is this, that He give me some food one day and then I can not have any food another day. And the next day He gives me some food and I don't have enough food another day. Even though the house of the Prophet ﷺ would go sometimes 7 or 8 days without food being cooked in the house because there wasn't any. And he ﷺ, even sometimes when food came to him, he'd give it to others. We don't, alhamdulillah, this is not an obligation upon us to live, otherwise none of us could even fulfill even that much of the sunnah, okay, if we were to live like that. But it's something we are encouraged to develop in ourselves. To live for the poor. To remember them. To remember that these du'afa, these poor people, amongst the Muslimun, particularly obviously, they probably have hearts which are more loved by Allah than our hearts. What does money make? What does money do to a heart? It doesn't do much good. It doesn't do much good. There are some people that money does good to, because they become shakirun. They become mutasaddiqun, they become people who are thankful to Allah and spend in His way. But most, money makes hearts hard. Money makes us selfish, money makes us greedy, money makes us self-centered. But the du'afa, and the poor ones and the needy ones, when they have hearts that are humble before their Lord. It's not surprising then the Prophet ﷺ says the poor will enter paradise 50,000 years before the rich. And look at that. Look at my stupidity. I'm trying to be rich. I'm trying to be rich, but my Prophet told me the poor will enter paradise 50,000 years before the rich. And I'm trying to be of the people who will be last in paradise if they get in at all. Where is the aql? Where is the intelligence? Subhanallah. Ajib. You see, we become an ummah that doesn't think according to the nur of wahi, the light of revelation. We think we're intelligent, but actually we're stupid. We're stupid, and the more we are away from revelation, the stupider we are. أَفَلَا تَعْقِلُونَ? Will you not then use your aql, the Quran says? SubhanAllah. So that's an important lesson. The lesson of neediness and helping the needy. What else is tied to that? What other lesson is tied to realizing that, oh, I'm hungry and other people are hungry? What is supposed to happen now that I realize I'm hungry?
Giving.
Okay, so we've done that, giving and helping the poor. Okay, what other lesson or virtue, fadila, can come when I remember that I'm hungry? And I remember that I'm not allowed to eat until, 9:20 something or whatever. What else can happen to the heart? What quality can come into our hearts? Okay, taqwa, but that's la'allakum tattaqun, something more specific. Patience, sabr. Which is going back to the idea of self-control and restraint. Which is why this month the Prophet called Ramadan Shahrul Sabr. Shahrul Sabr. Sabr, which we translate as patience. Please don't confuse patience with complacency. In English, we say that, oh, you're being complacent. When there is something you have to do, but you just can't be bothered to do. Okay? If there is a duty that needs to be fulfilled, or a responsibility that must be done, and a person doesn't do it, and he says, yeah, it will be done, it will get done, or someone will do it, or some magic will fall from the sky, we might say to that person, you're being complacent. This is not the same as sabr. Sabr is to do the things that are within our power, but to refrain from complaining against Allah and behaving in a way with the tongue and the hands which Allah doesn't like. Cursing, swearing, punching things, beating the chest, matam, all these things. It's against sabr. It's against sabr, patience. Sabr is mentioned over 90 times in the Quran, and sabr is wajib, is fard, is an obligation. When someone passes away, the eyes can shed tears, the heart can feel, can weep and cry. But the tongue and the limbs, they must act patiently. Patience is habasun nafs, restraining the soul. That's why it's self-control. It teaches us that if we can obey Allah in keeping away from the halal, food and drink is normally halal, it shows me that I can obey Allah from keeping away from the haram. The haram is a no-no. The halal is a yes. But for Ramadan, the yes, I can't eat and drink. If I can manage to keep myself away from that in the daytime of Ramadan, it shows me that I have, bi'idhnillah, Allah put in me the sabr, the self-control to keep away from the haram. In Ramadan and outside Ramadan. And sabr is also needed in waiting for the promises of Allah. Allah has made a number of promises to this ummah. Allah makes promises to His prophets, His Anbiya alayhi salatu wasalam. For example, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed to Jacob, Yaqub alayhi salam, that his son Yusuf alayhi salam, he will have sharaf and nobility. He will have izzah, dignity. And all the people will realize it. And he told Yusuf's father, Yaqub, Jacob, he told Jacob this when Yusuf was maybe 10 years old. Then what happens to Yusuf? 10, 12, 13 years old. Not even older than that. Then what happens? In the story of Yusuf alayhi salam, the brothers of Yusuf take Yusuf, they want to kill him, but they decide they will throw him in a well. Gets thrown in the well, he gets picked up by strangers, taken to Egypt. So now he's away from home, he's away from his parental love, he's not a free man, he's now a slave. And he's living in the house, in the palace, in the house of the minister. And then the minister's wife tries to seduce him. Because when Yusuf alayhi salam grows to manhood, he's 18 or 20, something like that, he's incredibly handsome, alayhi salam. And the minister's wife, in whose house he's working in, tries to seduce him. Anyway, he gets away from that by the grace of Allah, but a little while later he's put in prison. Not directly because of that, but indirectly because of that. So now he's in prison. And he's in prison for a number of years. 6, 7 years, 8 years. But Allah promised Yusuf alayhi salam when he was 13, when he was 10, when he was 13, Allah promised him dignity, victory, izzah. And he's 13, and since that time his life has gone, from our point of view, his life has gone downhill. For Yusuf alayhi salam, it wasn't going downhill, it was always going uphill. But from our point of view, dunya point of view, what's this going on? It's going downhill. And then finally, then one of the 2 prisoners with him, he's got 2 prisoners with him, he knows that one of them is going to be free. Look, when you're free, mention me to the king, because I'm still here. The man gets free, and he has the job of serving the wine to the king, and he forgets Yusuf because he's just like, I'm free, and he kind of forgets it. So some years pass, and then the king, then he remembers, I don't want to go into the story of Yusuf. The king says, oh, bring Yusuf out. Yusuf comes out, it's already interpreted the king's dream, and then 14 years. He's put in charge of the grain. 7 years of good harvest, 7 years of famine. And it's only after the 7 years of famine, 7 years of good food, then 7 years of famine, does that whole thing of the izzah, the sharaf come. 14 years, 7 odd years in prison. 8, 9 years, 5, 6, 7 years as a servant in that house. He's about 35, 40 years old, and Allah's promise comes to him. What is the lesson for this? When Allah promises, it will always happen. But we shouldn't be impatient thinking it will happen tomorrow. Allah makes things happen according to His time and His planning and His calendar, not ours. So when Allah says, هُوَ الَّذِي أَرْسَلَ رَسُولُهُ بِالْهُدَى وَالدِّينِ الْحَقِّ لِيُظْهِرَهُ عَلَى الدِّينِ كُلِّهِ وَلَوْ كَرِهَ الْمُشْرِكُونَ أو وَلَوْ كَرِهَ الْكَافِرُونَ. It is Allah who sent His messenger with guidance and the religion of truth, that He may make it supreme over all other religions, even if the idolaters are averse to it or dislike it. It's going to happen. There are things we need to do of acting on Islam properly, being true Muslims as best as possible, but it will happen. We don't have to bend the laws of Islam by targeting women and children in cafes or clubs and casinos and whatever, because it's a war. Even if it was, there are rules. There are rules, right? We cannot. The means don't justify the ends in Islam. I cannot say that just because I'm coming to the masjid for Salatul Taraweeh and it starts, what time does Taraweeh start here? 10:50, right? 10:50 is Isha, probably, yeah? Okay. So yeah, so let's just say, by 11, Taraweeh is definitely going to start. But 10:50 Isha, I can't say that, because in my car I'm going to Isha. Isha is a fun. Jama'ah, so much reward. Then after that Taraweeh, even more reward. Remember the Prophet ﷺ said, that Allah said, when a son of Adam does a good deed, I reward it to 10 to 700 times. So 1 rak'ah of Taraweeh is like you prayed 700 rak'ah of Taraweeh. 20 rak'ah of Taraweeh is between 200 to 1,400 rak'ahs. One gets the reward of that. So there's many reasons to come to the masjid. In fact, in that hadith, Prophet said, I will reward 10 to 700 times except for fasting. That is for me. Meaning, that's a way of saying, Allah will reward the fasting even more. SubhanAllah. And this is why the Prophet said in the hadith, whoever, may that person's nose be rubbed in the dust, who the month of Ramadan comes and then it finishes and he doesn't receive the maghfirah of Allah, the forgiveness of Allah. How can we not reach the forgiveness of Allah when one prayer is 10 to 700 times rewarded? The fast is who knows how much rewards we're going to get from that. The devils are chained up. Allah frees people from the fire every night. Laylatul Qadr is there better than 1,000 months. So Taraweeh is there for an extra prayer. How can we not have hasanat at the end? So he said, may that person be disgraced, his nose be rubbed in the dust, who doesn't reach Allah's maghfirah. And we would have had to be walking backwards or running top speed backwards not to get any maghfirah in Ramadan. It's like going to Harrods, okay, and it's not Fayyad anymore, it's the Qataris, right? I can't remember who it is. Anyway, the Qataris say, okay, Abu Aaliyah, all of Harrods, you have 30 hours. You have 30 hours to just fill up their basket with whatever you want. No, you don't have to pay a penny. And then you're all waiting outside the doors of Harrod for what will Abu Ali bring out. Will he lug out 100, one of those 90-inch plasma tellies which cost about £25,000 or whatever? Is he going to go to the jewelry thing and get one of those big diamond rings worth 350k? Will he get that car in the middle of Harrods, which is one of those Porsche things, about 100,000? What's he going to come out with? And I come out, okay? Two of us, me and my friend. My friend comes out with a bar of Twix, right? Whole of Harrods, but he comes out with Twix. You can get that from your local corner shop, right? And I come out with my basket is empty. He said, well, what are you doing? I was just looking. Yeah, but 30 hours, right? Maybe you look for 3 or 4 hours, and then some hours you put things in your basket. I think, what a stupid idiot. What's happening? That's like Ramadan. That's really like Ramadan. Sabr. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will make it, our situation come true. All we have to remember, especially Muslim news, and I don't say this because it's on the news, and I don't say this because, God forbid, someone is writing my script for me. I'm saying this, as I have said, since 1991 or 1992. There is no reason to get agitated and angry in that sense. Of course there should be anger for the sake of Allah, but it's not anger. There's ghadab, there's anger in the heart. It shows sometimes in the way we speak, but it's not frothing at the mouth. But it doesn't allow us to go against the ulama and the rules of the Sharia. If any individual or groups of individuals call you for some big thing, ask the question, what does the Sharia say about this? What does the law of Islam say about this? And ayna ulama'ukum, where are your scholars? Not someone who's done 6-7 years in Darul Ulum, memorized the Quran, not someone like me, Talib al-Ilm, not some young blood who's just come out of a Islamic university and he's 22? Ulama, the ones of deep understanding and deep faith. Aina ulama, where are your scholars? Not some Algerian who can speak Arabic, but he's actually as jahil as two planks. Ulama. Okay? Because there will not cease to be a group of my ummah victorious on the truth. At every age there will be rightly guided ulama. We may not understand why they say what they do, but they have the evidences and the proofs from the book and the sunnah. Some people say going to Syria, for a Muslim in the UK, for him to go to Syria, it's haram. And I tell you it's not. What I'll tell you though is three things. The British government, it's forbidden by law. And it has been forbidden for anyone who holds a British citizenship to fight in foreign wars for nearly 100 years now. For nearly 100 years there has been a law in Parliament that anyone who holds a British citizenship is not allowed to fight in foreign lands, in foreign wars, except through the way of the army. It is allowed for you to fight in Syria according to the Sharia, with one condition. With one condition. Since the land you live in has made it unlawful, and we cannot, as the rule of thumb, break the law of the land, I can go to Syria only by when I get there I relinquish my British citizenship and I have no intention of returning here through haram means. Then, when I'm not under the citizenship of the government, I'm not under the government's law. But why do you want to go to Syria, and who will you be fighting? Clear-cut kuffar? Or will you be fighting many who are Muslims? And the scholars aren't agreed about the hal, the state of the Assad family. One group